Welcome to this special edition of Daily Pulse, where we keep your finger on the pulse of the latest breaking news and the news they're keeping from you. I'm your host, Maria Zeee. A quick reminder to head on over to free speech platform Rumble to watch our full show. If you're not subscribed to our channel yet, do so immediately to catch our no holds barred reporting brought to you by the Vigilant Fox and Zeee Media. We are in the fog of war, and predicting the outcome of war is near impossible because it can change at any given moment, as can the sentiment of those involved. One thing is certain: those who've been paying attention have learned to 1. Ignore the mainstream media narrative, and 2. Look beyond the headlines and assess what the real agenda behind every crisis is. Intentional or not, this war is accelerating the Great Reset. Multiple countries are now imposing restrictions on their populations that mirror Agenda 2030 objectives. These are the same countries that fell in line during COVID, part 1 of the Great Reset, and that detail really does matter. So what is the ultimate goal here? Well, someone who's been studying the Great Reset and true geopolitical objectives of the New World Order for years is Alex Newman. He knows the history and he knows what comes next. Alex joins us after a word from one of the sponsors who make our independent reporting possible. If there's one thing we can learn from the Epstein files, it's that there are 2 tiers in this country. One for regular people and one for the rich and connected. And that divide doesn't stop in the courtroom, it runs straight through the financial system. While most people stay distracted, the wealthy keep multiplying their net worth. One of the fastest ways they've done that is through cryptocurrency. For years, crypto has been a playground for experienced traders to capitalize on everyday investors who panic sell at the worst possible moment. But now, everyday people can finally be on a level playing field. Animus AI, available through BlockTrust IRA, analyzes market data and executes trades with precision most investors can't match. Since 2022, it has outperformed Bitcoin by 250%. In 2025 alone, BlockTrust IRA helped create over 80,000 new millionaires. And right now, our viewers can receive $2,500 in bonus crypto instantly when they open a qualifying account through dailypulsecrypto.com. Start supercharging your retirement today. Take the first step at dailypulsecrypto.com. That's dailypulsecrypto.com. Alex Newman, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you back. Well, there is no one that I know better to look at this and break down the Great Reset elements of what we are seeing here. Very much a COVID 2.0 style situation. We called it that very early on, and now even the mainstream media is calling it that. Let's talk about this crisis, Alex, and where it's heading.
Well, thanks again, Maria. And one of the very distinctive features of COVID was how it brought global supply chains to a halt. It caused prices to skyrocket across the board because supply chains were slowing down and some international shipping and international travel was stopped. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now, thanks to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Exact same fruit, exact same consequences. The policies that produced it are, of course, a little bit different, but they're having the same intended effect. And we're already hearing the totalitarians seizing on these very effects as a pretext to call for the very same kind of policies that they called for during COVID, even though the excuse is entirely different, which I think leads to some pretty important conclusions.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of considerations here as far as which countries are actually involved in the orchestration of this. We note that there have been countries that have said, no, we're not going to help with the crisis in the Strait. All of these countries are countries that implemented COVID vaccine mandates, passports, things of this nature. And then people are thinking that this is a sort of a political fight, whereas I'm looking at this a little bit further away and saying, well, no, hang on, what if this is what they want? What are your thoughts on this, Alex?
Well, we know that some of the things that are happening are things that the elitists, the would-be great resetters, the would-be New World Order engineers have been advocating for generations. And we've seen the excuse constantly change. I'll give people just a quick refresher. Back in the 1970s and in the 80s, they were arguing that we were facing imminent global cooling. They predicted that we'd have a new ice age, that food crops would fail because it got so cold. They talked about the ice cap moving down into North America and into Northern Europe, and this causing catastrophic global famine. And the problem according to these very same people, was carbon dioxide emissions were producing global cooling. And so the solution was we need to empower international organizations. We need to reduce fossil fuel consumption. We need to empower government at every level to micromanage your life. And we need to take more of your money away. Now, obviously, no global cooling. For good measure, they threw in there that maybe we should melt the Arctic ice cap with black soot, which I think was just kind of thrown in there as maybe like a comic relief or something. And no, obviously, none of that ever happened. We didn't have global catastrophic cooling. They were all wrong. They all ended up with egg on their face. But within a couple of decades, they were back with their new and improved scam. It was the global warming scam. Same alleged problem, human emissions of carbon dioxide, human activity, same alleged solution. Less energy for you, less freedom for you, more power for government and international organizations. Global warming didn't come to be, so it became climate change. Climate change didn't really work out, so we had COVID. Now, COVID didn't really work out, so now we've got apparently this new and improved pretext for the exact same kind of tyranny that we've seen over and over again. And there's a pattern here, right? People just, even with basic pattern recognition skills, should look at this and say, they've tried this before multiple times and they're always wrong and the solution is always the same. Something is very fishy here.
Yeah, except this time it's actually tangible. So where during the time of COVID, they were, they relied on an invisible virus. Asymptomatic people are actually sick, whereas now there is actually a serious problem. There are
That's right.
ships stranded. We can tangibly assess that this is real,
Yep.
and how far the orchestration goes. I'm not certain. I'll be honest. I'm not certain who is actually colluding in this manner. I have noted that Iran was extremely aggressive during COVID on their population, digital vax passports, all of the above. So my question was, Alex, how likely is it that a country that was all in during the Great Reset Part 1, being COVID, is now not somehow in on it?
I am absolutely confident that there's some element of collaboration here, and it's hard to track down. But one of the things that you see very clearly is that the Iranians are very close allies with the Communist Chinese and with the Kremlin. And I think there's a lot of mistaken analyses that argue that the BRICS are standing up to the mean Western New World Order globalists. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what's happening. If you look at who put these regimes in place, who empowered them, and Communist China is an especially obvious example, it was the same globalists. I mean, Klaus Schwab was bragging just a few years ago about how for 40 years they helped build up the Communist Chinese economy, which of course built up the Communist Chinese military. You had Bill Gates openly celebrating his partnership with the CCP. You had Rothschilds going on TV talking about how extraordinary Communist China was. You have Jeffrey Epstein back and forth cavorting with the highest levels of the CCP. So we need to recognize that, as the famous George Carlin said, there's a big club and you're not in it. Do the mullahs truly believe the kind of nonsense that they spout? I don't know. Maybe, probably not. Very much like with the communists, there's the smoke screen to bring in the useful idiots, and then there's the leaders behind the scenes who laugh all the way to the bank. My guess is there's something along those lines going on here, but clearly there is collaboration across borders, and you're right. The COVID response is a good way for looking at who might have been involved. And we see the same thing, by the way, with Benjamin Netanyahu. He was one of the most ruthless proponents of COVID tyranny. They had some of the most ruthless mandatory vaccine policies of any country in the world.
Yeah, he had a vaccine on his desk.
That's right. He was proposing microchipping children to keep them safe from COVID. So we've got on both sides of this divide, and I have no reason to doubt that there's really hostility between a lot of Iranians and a lot of Israelis.
Of course.
But at the highest levels, it's not just the United States that unfortunately has had treasonous deep state leaders in power at the highest levels of business and government for many generations. This is true largely around the world. There's a handful of exceptions, and they become apparent during things like COVID, where people like Jair Bolsonaro say, no, this is a scam, we're not participating. Then oh, that guy's the real deal. At least it seems to be. But clearly, COVID is a really good litmus test to see whether governments are on board with this great reset agenda or whether they're genuinely independent. And in this case, I think the Iranians clearly failed that test.
Yeah, it's a really important consideration. We're in the fog of war. There's a lot of temptation on many sides to pick a team, which I think is disgraceful, Alex, and I blame a lot of the media for this. Treating this like a sports match when innocent lives are being lost on all sides, and it really is. It's really disgraceful. But my point is, we're sort of trying to assess who's actually whose enemy. There was a statement made by the Serbian president late last year, and he said every single one of us is preparing for war, which is really interesting because I don't consider him an honest man, but I think he told the truth here. He said every single one of us is preparing for war. Without a doubt. He said we're just at the point now where we're trying to figure out who's actually going to be allied with who. And it is possible because, the proponents of the Great Reset and all of those involved are certainly not loyal like people, everyday people like you and me are to those around us. It is possible that there's been a fracture in the ways in which they want to conduct this either way. Or who's going to be in power at the end of it, right? But either way, it's resulting in the same outcome, which is the Great Reset.
Yeah, no question about it. And what you said is important. There are always power struggles within groups of megalomaniacs and criminals. If you look, for example, at the regime of Joseph Stalin, one of the most barbaric regimes to ever exist in human history, he murdered something like 30 out of 34 of his top deputies. Right? Some of them wanted to take power from him. Some of he didn't trust. You see the same thing with mafia bosses. Right? You got the guy at the top, and then the three guys under him are plotting on how they can take his space. You've got differences in opinion on how exactly things ought to be run, how public relations ought to be conducted. So there's always the element of that, but there is an agenda to bring about a third world war. It's been in place for a very long time. It involves people across the West. It involves people across the so-called BRICS, which, by the way, is a term coined by a Goldman Sachs toady. If you look back, I've been talking about this lately because there's really a lack of understanding on this particular issue. But back in the 1970s and the early 1980s, we had some defectors from the Soviet Union who revealed an incredible plan. And it still sounds incredible today to people who have not heard it and studied it. But the key guy who came forth with these revelations, he went through Finland and then eventually Canada and the United States and tried to explain what he knew. His name was Anatoly Golichin, and he was in Department D at the KGB. This was their long-range disinformation department. And what he said was the Soviet party, the Soviet apparatus, was working on long-range disinformation plans. And he gave a lot of examples. You had the Sino-Soviet split, which was totally manufactured for public consumption in the West. And he made, and finally, the CIA, the FBI weren't very interested in what he had to say. So he published two books about this that are available to the public. I would encourage people to read them: New Lies for Old and Perestroika Deception. And what he says is they have this plan with a whole bunch of specific milestones whereby they're going to eventually bring the world under a global tyrannical government. And of those 206 very specific predictions, about 200 have come true to the letter. Even the right people that he named, the right organizations, the right countries. He predicted that there would be a phony collapse of the Soviet Union. He predicted that we would be bringing down the Berlin Wall, that there would be a reunification between East and West, that the European Union would absorb all these former communist states, still run largely by communists. And he said the grand finale, the last and most important prediction, was what he described as a second October revolution, which he said would involve the Kremlin, Beijing, their allies around the world. And so once they thought the United States was weak enough, was defenseless enough to be able to pull this off, there would be a massive global conflagration that they hoped would end with the utter demolition of the United States, not just as a hegemonic power, but even as like an independent free nation, and then the eventual merger of all the nations and regional governments of the world into a single global system. And I believe that's the plan. I believe that's what we're headed toward. I can't tell you who all is involved. Is Trump part of it? I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't know. But it looks to me, based on everything that's happening, that that's the direction we're going. And if you put all these dots together, and Anatoly Golichin didn't know anything or didn't know everything. He was in the Soviet Union. He had limited access to outside information. He didn't know, probably, for example, that the big Wall Street banks had funded the Bolshevik Revolution. So he was missing parts of this puzzle. But when you take his revelations and combine it with everything else that we know, it seems very clear that that's where we're moving toward: a global Third World War type scenario. Including massive food shortages, massive energy shortages, unbelievable chaos and destruction, followed by what these maniacs hope will be the Great Reset, the Build Back Better, the final emergence of a totalitarian global new system.
Well, something you just touched on is very important, and it's something that I think, Alex, after COVID, a lot of people either went back to sleep or got swept up in the new wave of propaganda that emerged after that. which sort of convinced a lot of people that we were winning, lulled them back into a false sense of security, all of this sort of stuff. Meanwhile, journalists like you and me and others who are paying attention are looking at this and going, no, this is full steam ahead. What do you mean we're winning? Certainly, I'm glad that the public realizes, but this is not going anywhere. BlackRock diverted from ESG and the green agenda because they need the energy for data centers. By the way, you're still going to have your energy limited. It's going to go to the data centers because national security, right? So
That's exactly right.
And we're already seeing that happen. But you mentioned something very important, which I do want to touch on. Those of us who've been studying the Great Reset for some time understood that the plan is for the US to not be the world's superpower anymore. And I don't want to see that, in my personal opinion. It is very important that the United States remains the world's superpower. A number of different reasons. One of those being the fact that it's sort of it is the last bastion of freedom. The First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth Amendment. The Constitution is the strongest document in the world that protects human liberty, right? And so if they can erode that, then, I know people who are in other countries in the West who still look to the US as a beacon of light. There's still hope if that Constitution reigns supreme. And there's still a battle there. But if they can erode that, and by the way, WEF has been talking about China being the world's superpower by 2050. They're all preparing for that. So if they can erode that and make something like China the world's superpower, imagine the demoralization across the whole world, by the way, if that happens. So what are your thoughts on this in terms of how aggressively are they pushing now? And you said Trump's not really involved in that. Has he been fooled? Or, is this was he convinced? We've had, testimony from Joe Kent and others talking about these topics, that he was sort of fooled by the Israeli lobby, and this is why this is all occurring. What are your thoughts on all of this? I realize that was a very long explanation, but I'm sure you'll comprehend.
Yeah, well, there's several elements here. Let's start with the trajectory for China. It's been very clear to me for over 15 years now. People can go back and read my work for 15 years. You'll see I've been talking about this virtually my entire time in journalism. There is an agenda, a very clear agenda that goes back decades, if not generations, to build communist China into the new global superpower, to displace and replace the United States of America as the unchallengeable hegemonic power in the world, but integrated into the global system that they're building. And a lot of my work has focused on this over the last 10 years. If you look at the architecture of global governance, it is now largely controlled by the CCP. That's true with the United Nations. That's true with the International Monetary Fund. It's true with the World Bank. And it's true, by the way, with all the supposedly rival institutions that the CCP is building, right? Like the AIIB. So you have the institutions of global governance that were largely built by the US government and the Soviet Union in the aftermath of World War II, now largely in the hands of the CCP. So the CCP, I think, is playing several really critical roles here. One is they're the model, right? It's the pilot project. If you want to know what the future looks like, look at China. Total digital control, total surveillance, social credit scored to be able to access anything at all. Basically, tyranny with a massive fist to back it up. And if you are too far out of line, you end up like, for example, the Uyghurs, the Christians, the Falun Gong. You end up in a re-education camp. And if you still won't comply, you end up on an operating table where they're chopping out your organs. That's the vision of the future if these megalomaniacs get their way. But this didn't happen organically, right? The fake narrative is that communist China was just so good at business and so good at innovation. It's a total lie. They were built up. And by the way, this goes all the way back to the installing of the communist regime in power in China. If you go back to the aftermath of World War II, it was subversives within the U.S. government who brought Chairman Mao to power. People like George Marshall, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. They literally put an arms embargo on our ally, Chiang Kai-shek, who lost enormous numbers of men fighting alongside Americans against the Japanese in World War II. They gifted Stalin Manchuria for no reason at all, so he could run in there, grab all the supplies from the Japanese, and hand them over to Mao. They did this on purpose. Then they built up communist China on purpose. So on the one hand, it's the the kind of the role model, what everything should look like, and on the other, it's an engine driving this process forward. So it's playing two very, very important roles on this front, and you can't understand properly what's coming if you don't understand the role of China. Secondly, where does Trump fit into all this? And again, I don't know. I've been trying to understand this for 8 years, and I know people who work with Trump, who have worked with Trump. I know people who know him well, and these are good, decent, honorable, God-fearing, patriotic Americans. Okay,
Yeah.
here's a good example. Early on in his first term in 2017. He had Rich Higgins as the director of policy and planning on the National Security Council. Now, this is a man, if you haven't read the Higgins memo, you should, ladies and gentlemen. He outlined everything that was coming. He said there's an international coalition of jihadists and Islamists, communists, socialists, the globalists, all working together, he said, for the destruction of the United States of America, not just as a nation, but even as an ideal, to your point about the
Yes.
Constitution. They need to discredit the principles that America was founded on, the biblical principles that God gave us a right to life, God gave us a right to property, and government exists to protect those rights and punish evil. They have to discredit even those ideas. And it seems to me that either Trump is being used, and I'm just going to land there. I believe Trump is being manipulated, and he may have some kind of super secret plan, 7D chess. I don't know. I don't see it at the moment. Maybe he does. I hope he does. But I think he is being used right now as kind of the focal point for global anger, and they're hoping that by crashing the economy, collapsing the old world order on his watch, and using him as an agent to help bring in some of this madness, that they will forever discredit, what passes for, Christian conservatism, I guess, in the United States of America, which would, of course, be inextricably linked to the founding principles, the Constitution, the Declaration. So I think that's where we're going. I'd like to see some different policies from Trump. How did he get sucked into this war in Iran? I don't know. I'm told he had some information that not just Iran, but some of its allies were planning something big against the United States. How true that may be, I don't know. But and I'll give one more example real quick, Maria. I know I'm talking a lot here,
No,
but
no, keep going.
to kind of illustrate the role that he is playing, and not one in 1,000 MAGA supporters understand the first thing about this. So I'm not criticizing Trump's supporters, but one of the key things that Klaus Schwab talks about in the Great Reset is that people are so upset about globalization right now. So he says we need an in-between solution. He calls it an in-between solution, and that in-between solution, he says, is regionalism or regional government. And he lists the European Union as the premier example of what this looks like. But he says even in North America, right, we've got Canada, Mexico, the United States, they trade so much with each other. We can easily move along these regional lines to create this kind of what Kissinger described as a world order made up of regional orders that are eventually integrated into this single global system. And Trump, wittingly or unwittingly, and I've had discussions with some of his key people on this. I know some of them know this, but Trump has actually helped accelerate this faster than even Bush and even Obama were able to do. He did pull the plug on some really bad programs like the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'll give credit where credit is due. But if you look at the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, this is a really significant policy that has flown almost under the radar for American conservatives. What it is basically NAFTA on steroids. NAFTA built up these North American tribunals, these North American regulatory bureaucracies, this North American jurisprudence with a regulatory apparatus. USMCA expanded all of that. It radically expanded the areas of law that are covered under these North American governance institutions. And if you go back to even like 2007, we've got the documents through WikiLeaks. They were always planning to create a North American currency, a North American parliament. Now, under this Trump administration, we see the U.S. government saying we're going to actually try to expand the USMs because we're coming up on the review this year. And this would be a perfect time to pull the plug on the whole thing. Trump has spoken very clearly against multilateral trade agreements that surrender our sovereignty. Why not pull the plug? Instead, they're saying, hey, other countries are dumping their junk in Mexico and Canada, shipping it into the U.S. and avoiding tariffs. We need a common external border now, like the Europeans have. So, folks, it's happening in all these different ways that we're not focusing on, and we need to be realistic, not Pollyannas, in terms of what's happening and what's coming.
Yeah, I agree with you. There are many, many patterns that we're seeing that are spelling out this acceleration that a lot of people aren't paying attention to, and it's very alarming and also very difficult to be across absolutely every single aspect of it, right? So, the parts that have concerned me, I mean, day two, Stargate was the biggest red flag for me, Alex, because I
Yeah.
understand the AI agenda, I would say quite well, something I've been reporting on for years now. I understand the digital ID and digital currency agenda, as do you, by the way. And so when I look at all of this, and just yesterday, just this week, actually, we reported on the National Policy Framework for AI, and in there, it's calling for digital ID for absolutely every single person. And there are multiple bills. Senator Marsha Blackburn just introduced one as well that is calling for the freezing of accounts if people do not submit to a digital ID, which they call more palatably age verification. It's the same thing. It's just it's a nicer synonym. So I'm seeing this acceleration again, like you said, wittingly or unwittingly. We'd never really know what's in someone's heart unless they say so. And even then, can you really trust
Even
it in
then.
this day and age, right? But wittingly or unwittingly, this is happening. My theory, and I'm keen to hear your thoughts, is that they are. We've seen such an acceleration of legislation for these building blocks of technocracy, such a disregard for the human beings for the citizens of every single government that are protesting against this. It seems like they are rushing to get through every single possible bill that they can for that complete control, build as many data centers as they possibly can, and push all the control into technocracy so that after the war, that emerges as the ruling principles and the ruling power. What are your thoughts on that?
There's no question that that's what's happening, Maria. And there's several key things that you said that I think really need to be expanded on. So you talked about the digital ID. One of the things that Trump has done that I've been so frustrated with, and I doubt he's personally overseeing this, but his Department of Homeland Security under Kristi Noem went like full-blown tyrant on this thing, Real ID. So we've been exposing Real ID for almost 20 years now. Real ID is the first really significant federal effort to federalize the identification system in the United States through federal databases, federal requirements, federal standards. And what has happened just since Trump took office for the second term is that states are now being bullied in an extraordinary way to comply or have their citizens unable to get on airplanes or have to face all kinds of additional harassment and abuse to be able to get on an airplane. And this is happening under Trump, right? You can't have the global technocracy without the digital national biometric ID, and they are bringing this in very, very rapidly.
Are you protected in a world where threats of EMPs, solar flares, 5G, and all types of EMF are interfering with our very existence? Escape the grid with Escape Zone, bringing you the highest quality Faraday technology for ultimate preparedness. Choose when and where your devices are detectable. Faraday bags protect you from EMPs, car theft, card and device skimming, identity theft, tracking, Bluetooth, and GPS. Choose from premium mobile Faraday bags, crossbody bags, laptop bags, and even women's handbags, or opt for the optimum protection with a ballistic backpack, combining cutting-edge Faraday technology with a ballistic 3A Kevlar for the ultimate protection and preparedness. Now you can also protect from EMF with their top-notch EMF beanies and blankets, shielding you from some of the most harmful frequencies in our environment. Whatever your needs are, Escape Zone has you covered, and their range is perfect for personal use, family use, or even as a gift for someone you truly care about. Visit escapezone.com/pulse and protect you and your loved ones today. That's escapezone.com/pulse. Because I just saw footage this week now that, and I posited that it was funny. I was just having a conversation with someone this week, and I said the current quote unquote Democrat shutdown, aka Uniparty shutdown, is very much a way to further cripple the system. And of course, the problem is with airlines, they want to reduce travel. This war is going to achieve that largely, but in America, it's even more aggressive right now with these issues with TSA and lines. 150 minutes, people standing in line. I don't even know how they're managing to fly right now, and so I said this crisis, which may or may not be manufactured, you know,
Totally manufactured.
is going to, because there was a discussion from Kristi Noem about privatizing the TSA, and people didn't understand what, you know, they thought, well, that's a good idea, or, you know, it's so inefficient right now, it shouldn't be run by the government. You know, there are many different arguments here, but the point is, they are moving to give big tech control over everything, because big tech can impose things on us that government never could. For example, shadow banning you. Well, if the government did that, they are doing it by colluding with big tech. But if the government did that directly, that would be a violation of the First Amendment. So there's this transfer of power from government to tech. And that is exactly what is going to happen with the TSA, I said to this person. And I said, they will privatize it, then they will impose extreme measures on people in order to be able to travel to achieve that C40 cities goal of 1,500 kilometers of travel per person every 3 years, roughly 700 miles. That is the goal. And in order to do that, you can't have government restricting your travel like that, at least not in the United States. They need a private company managing this. Less than 24 hours later, Alex, Elon Musk comes out and makes an announcement that he wants to pay the salaries of these TSA agents. And everyone says, wow, what a hero. And I'm like, this is the first step to private companies taking over air travel. And people, I feel, just can't put these pieces together.
Yeah, and it's worth reminding everybody the reason we have chaos at the airports right now is because Congress mandated TSA agents, and then Congress won't fund the TSA agents that they mandated for us to be able to travel. So it's a totally manufactured crisis. It's a crisis because the government created a crisis, just like all these crises.
Yeah.
And it actually fits in with exactly what we've been talking about, Maria. Back in 1962, the U.S. State Department, through the Institute for Defense Analyses, commissioned a report from a guy called Lincoln Bloomfield, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, former intelligence operative, very, very well connected. And the name of the report gave it all away. It was a world effectively controlled by the United Nations. And the goal was to figure out how we get from the Westphalian system of relatively sovereign nation states operating as the key actors on the global political and geopolitical stage to a world effectively controlled by the UN, where we'd have a global system. And his task was to figure out how to do that quickly. He said using organic trends, it would be hundreds of years before we got to that kind of world. But he said there's a way to short circuit that. There's a way to accelerate that process. And the catalyst, he said, will be war, the threat of war, and massive crises. And he says we can use war, threat of war, crises to change people's attitudes so that they'll be open to what he described as a revolution in world political arrangements. He also said we can use these wars and these crises to facilitate the creation of regional governments and customs unions, just like what we're watching right now. So this is a public record document. Anybody can read this, and it's amazing how they're literally following that script right now. Henry Kissinger outlined this script in his book World Order in 2014. Use regional orders and eventually merge them into a world order. And one of the key things that is happening around Trump, again, with or without his understanding is a separate issue, but I would say other than God himself, probably the biggest obstacle to bringing about this revolution in world political affairs, for lack of a better term, is American conservatism, the American right, what kind of roughly aligned with the Republican Party in the United States. And what we're watching right now is the utter decimation of the American conservative movement. Yes. You've got the different podcasters. I mean, everybody sees this. You know, you can't listen to this guy. Well, this one's anti-Semitic. Well, this one's a crypto Jew and a shill of the and like all of this incredible hatred. And so what has happened is the American right is fractured. So I would suggest to people, before you jump on any of these bandwagons and, you know, I'm going to follow my favorite podcaster right off the cliff, or, you know, Trump likes Mark Levin, so I'm with Mark Levin, or, you know, stop it. Stop. You're being manipulated. Your fellow American Christian conservatives are not your enemy. This is a time where even if we don't agree on all things, we need to have some extra grace for people. Everybody's confused right now. You know, a lot of people are going to get stuff wrong. Just have a little bit of grace and a little bit of patience, and don't become a circular firing squad, because if the American right collapses, which is the plan, there will be no organized political force left on the planet with the power to either stop or at least arrest the progress of this, or rebuild something less totalitarian from the ashes of whatever's coming.
You are absolutely right. And I think that the last remaining, when I say, you know, America is sort of the last bastion, I am talking about the American right. I am talking about conservatives. They are the ones holding this idea together. And that required the destruction of conservatism. And unfortunately, this is my opinion, I don't think Trump has helped at all. He is saying, if you want the Epstein files, you're not MAGA. Okay,
It's a
so
Democrat hoax.
yeah, it's a
What?
Democrat hoax. But not only that, he said, I don't want your support. So he
Mm,
has pushed away genuine conservatives,
yes,
and
100%.
helped accelerate this fracture, and that is
Yep.
really, really alarming to me. And I'm seeing a lot of this stuff. I can't remember. Forgive me, Alex, the point that we were on before where I interrupted you about the TSA, but it, I'm just seeing a lot of this coming out of this administration and Republicans pushing so aggressively towards this digital agenda. And it's all very, very alarming. And I'm, glad to hear your analysis. The one thing that is missing with a lot of these podcasters, yes, we should have grace, but I put out something yesterday. It's not in my nature to attack others. If your favorite influencer or podcaster isn't warning you right now about the Great Reset and the implications of all of this towards the Great Reset, or at least attempting to understand it, they're really not worth your time. And I say that out of love for the people, because people invest so much of their time and energy to listen to people that they feel they can trust. And some of these, podcasters and influencers, who I'm sure many of are central casting, are not warning people about what is coming. So I want to talk about some of those tangible things that might be coming, Alex. We reported on this week, but this is the IEA talking about a 10-point plan that countries need to follow right now. And by the way, they absolutely are. And I'll go through that list in a moment. But we have working from home, reducing highway speed limits, encouraging public transport, alternate private car access to roads in large cities on different days. So number plate license readers, which by the way is part of the 15-minute city agenda, increased car sharing, efficient driving for road and commercial vehicles of delivery of goods. So they're saying better driving practices are going to, lead to cut in diesel use, diverting LPG use from transport, avoiding air travel, where possible, switch to non-modern cooking solutions. So they want you to use electricity, electric cooking, banning gas stoves like Joe Biden tried to, and leverage flexibility with petrochemical feedstocks, implement short-term efficiency and maintenance measures. Now, if you'll just bear with me, Alex, I want to show the audience just a really quick list of countries that are already following this. Fuel rationing, either implemented or proposed. We have Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Nepal, Slovenia, Egypt. Proposed or contingency plans are in the UK and Australia. And by the way, they've already proposed following something that New Zealand is floating, which is actually fining people if they drive more than the allocated number of days or the permitted days. Then you have license plate readers and driving / license plate based restrictions. China, India, Mexico, Latin America, Europe. Current fuel rationing. Sri Lanka, Myanmar, South Korea just announced it as well. The license plate readers common in the UK, France, Germany, Australia, Italy, Netherlands, South Africa, UAE, and some US states. And I will also say here, quickly, just a few more here. Shorter weeks limiting driving, working from home, and studying from home. Philippines, Pakistan, Vietnam, Thailand, Egypt. And I had someone respond to me today when I spoke about the fact that New South Wales in Australia was now proposing COVID-style protocols. Someone responded and said, it's starting in the US as well. In my area of upstate New York, schools are talking about bringing back the remote learning because of the skyrocketing cost of fuel, heating, and more. So it's already hitting the US, or starting to, Alex.
There's so much to say here, and I'll start with the fact that this should not be surprising to anyone. For several years now, I have been going around the country and even overseas warning people that the same policies they imposed during COVID were going to be resurrected, probably under the pretext of climate change. And I had them all on video talking about how maybe we need to flatten the curve, maybe we need energy rationing, maybe we need to have people work from home, all of the same stuff. They said we need to declare a climate emergency where the president would then be able to do all of these totalitarian policies. And they've made this argument very clearly. I was in Azerbaijan just a couple of years ago, and the head of the World Homicide Organization, I mean, the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, the communist terrorist, comes out and publicly says the biggest public health crisis facing humanity is climate change. So I run into the WHO's director of climate change and public health, a very nice lady named Dr. Neira, and I asked her, explain to us, please, how climate change is the biggest public health crisis. And I've got her on video. I show it to anybody. She says, climate change equals global warming, and global warming produces mosquitoes, and therefore, I lived in Scandinavia for a long time. There are mosquitoes as big as cars. You're not going to tell me that you need a warm climate to have mosquitoes. That's absurd. But this is the kind of nonsense. You've got John Kerry saying we need a climate emergency. Second of all, I was in the Amazon rainforest just a few months ago for the latest UN climate summit. In fact, we did the cover of the magazine is right here. This was the official guardian spirit of the COP30. It was given by the Chinese Communist Party. They said it was a fusion of the dragon spirit of China and the jaguar spirit of Brazil coming together to save Mother Earth. Obviously, it's a hideous beast with fangs and devil horns holding the world in its hands. And you see the little peace doves here fluttering away. But anyways, one of the things that they passed in this final agreement, this was passed by consensus. In other words, every government in the world agreed, and Trump didn't send anybody, so we weren't there to object, that humanity has a carbon budget. And they said in the final agreement, which, by the way, they consider an addendum to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, so they treat it as binding international law. They said we have already burned through 4/5 of our carbon budget. And because the United States and the West, Europe, Australia, Japan, because you guys burned most of that, the little bit that's left, the 20% of the carbon budget that we can still go through, that's got to go mostly to, you guessed it, China, India, South Africa, Brazil, and on and on. So this is the direction they're going, whether it's the very real energy crisis being caused by this war in Iran, whether it's the climate hoax. And it was so interesting to see, Maria, this thing about the license plates. I spent more years living in Mexico than anywhere else in the world. And I just share this little anecdote so people understand how this works. Mexico was a Mexico City, unbelievably polluted city. It's kind of like in a bowl of mountains, and they were still using leaded gasoline back then. That's how old I am. And so like the whole city would just be like toxic. You couldn't go out here. It was a real problem. And so their solution was, depending on the last number of your license plate, you can either drive or not. Yeah. Now, I lived in a very wealthy neighborhood. My dad worked he was a senior executive at a very important American company. That didn't affect us at all. We just bought an extra car so we could always drive. The rich people didn't even bat an eyelid. But if you're a poor person and you've got 1 or 2 or 3 days where you can't drive your car, well, maybe I don't need a car. Maybe I'll just go take the bus. Maybe I'll, sign up for whatever program. This is being planned. These ideas have already been tested. They have been engineered. And folks, your freedom is what's ultimately on the line here, not energy prices.
Absolutely. And on that, and I want to end on this point, the UBI and carbon credits. So say we hit a future, and I think in the very near future, where you're talking about automatic license plate readers, fines if you drive more than your allocated days, the even and odd numbers that they're using in multiple countries now to be tracking all of that, will obviously result in people who can't work from home to not be able to make an income in an already very strained financial situation. On top of that, there will be a lot of people who probably can work from home. They'll be replaced by AI very soon. Yeah. And so what you end up with is a huge crisis where, you've had some of these figures. I can't remember which one of them it was. One WEF affiliated person's talking about the fact that there are going to be people protesting on the streets. It may have even been Huang. Anyway, they're saying it's going to cause such a disruption that there will be people protesting because they can't find work on the streets. And now we're hearing 50% of white collar jobs wiped out in the next 12 to 18 months. 80%, the numbers are changing all the time. But as they transition into this AI, there are going to be a lot of people out of work. And so in comes the UBI or carbon credits. We have a very important report coming out soon on Technocracy Inc. and how this is an idea that goes back to the early 1900s that involves Elon Musk's grandfather, actually. So we'll dig into that. But basically they say that, even back then in this early version of Technocracy Inc., that there would be an allocated amount of credits for energy. And depending on your, behavior now, you'll be allocated these and have access to these credits. This is a UBI or a UHI, as Elon Musk calls it. Even Sam Altman floated the idea recently where your credits will be used to purchase energy, to purchase intelligence, right? So all of our access to resources and all of these things is going to be based on these credits that will likely be in the very near future. I am predicting, Alex, a proposed solution to the energy crisis. What are your thoughts on where
Yep.
this goes next?
You're exactly right, Maria. There's several things I want to say here, and I think I should start by saying, ladies and gentlemen, it is true that we have the Strait of Hormuz shut down, and it is true that this could cause some very real pain in the
Yes.
near term, both in terms of food prices and in terms of energy prices. But I want to say this really, really clearly. The energy crisis, so called, is entirely engineered. It is entirely the result of policies pursued by the US government deliberately and with malice aforethought. We have more energy resources in Alaska than we could ever possibly use in the next 4 centuries. We've got more oil than we could ever know what to do with. And yet the government has classified it as a national security secret, whatever. They've told everybody they have to be quiet. Absolute fraud. There's so much oil on this planet, we would never run out in 100 lifetimes. Okay, and if we did run out, we could do nuclear power. There's endless things we could do to have as much energy as we could possibly need. So the energy crisis has been engineered, and they may say, well, Strait of Hormuz, that's why this is all happening. Whatever. In the immediate term, yes, but the only reason we're even in this position to begin with is because they have defrauded us and they have prevented us from accessing the energy. So why are they doing this? Well, you mentioned technocracy. Back in the day, in the origins of the technocracy movement, it was all about efficiency, right? Free markets and self-government, those are terribly inefficient. We've got competition, resources wasted. If we had scientists and engineers running everything, it would be so much more efficient. We'd be so much more prosperous. They've changed a little bit. Now it's, sustainability and global warming, but it's the same underlying framework for the type of economy they want, where everything is rationed and everything is controlled. If you look at where this is going, it's exactly what Zbigniew Brzezinski was talking about when he and David Rockefeller partnered together to form the Trilateral Commission, which, by the way, Rockefeller put Epstein on the Trilateral Commission in 1990. Start connecting the dots, folks. The whole idea was to bring about what they called a new international economic order. And the heart of that new international economic order was we're not going to have money anymore in the sense that you earn it and then you can go spend it. The new system would involve some sort of credit, whether it's an energy credit or a carbon credit or whatever, that would entitle you to a certain amount of goods and services, energy for your home, whatever, transportation, food, whatever. And so it is literally technocracy, just with a slightly different name and a slightly different pretext. But it's the same people who've been working on this. And the universal basic income is the key mechanism through which they're going to bring this about. So I know I think, running up on time, Maria, but folks, look at the Great Taking. If you haven't followed the Great Taking, this is one of the mechanisms they hope to use to steal everything from everyone. All your stocks, your bonds, your 401k, your retirement, your precious pension, all that stuff that you were putting your faith and trust in to retire and live nicely. They're going to try to steal all that from you, but then they'll come on TV, just like during COVID, everybody be terribly scared. The world is collapsing, but don't worry. Your government loves you. Your government is working hard on a solution. Go to this website, download this little app, and you're going to get your central bank digital currency credits or whatever. You can get back to your regularly scheduled shopping. That's what they're planning for you. And it's probably coming sooner than any of us would like. So, folks, you better get prepared and you better get with others and work on trying to stop this, because once the trap closes, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to escape.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And this is sort of my main focus right now, Alex, is just trying to, I mean, it has been for years, trying to prepare people for what is coming. It's really shaping up to be, it looks like it's happening very soon. United Airlines CEO has put out a memo. It was leaked that they're expecting disruptions and reduction in flights essentially until the end of 2027. I dare say that the top of United Airlines would have some sort of idea of what is actually coming down the pipeline. I think that they will put people into a very desperate situation. Again, manufactured or not, it's coming. And desperate people tend to do things out of fear because they're not informed, they haven't prepared properly, or whatever the case may be. So I really am encouraging people that are watching this to prepare when it comes to food self-sufficiency, know where your water comes from, have alternative currencies, all these things that we've been talking about for years. Prepare with your local communities, help one another out so that you're not caught in a government breadline that depends on your compliance. This is what people need to be focused on more than anything right now, in my opinion. Alex, I don't know if you want to
Such
say anything about that.
such wise advice, Maria. And if you're just starting to prepare now, that's better than never. But this is something you should have started thinking about years ago. My family and I, we have now moved out to our farm. We've got redundant sources of water. We've got cows that I watch in the morning when I wake up. This is something that people should have been thinking about for a while. And of course, the objective needs to be to stop it. But Proverbs tells us that the wise man sees danger coming and takes cover or makes preparations. The fool just keeps on going and pays the price for that foolishness. Don't be
Yes.
the fool, right? If you've got family, especially, you have an obligation to make sure that they are as okay as they can be. And none of this is an excuse to leave the battle and say, well, I'm just going to build a prepper compound and but so we need to keep fighting, but we must be prepared. And part of this too is if you're prepared, you're much less easy to manipulate, right? They can't say, well, we'll take away your job, we'll take away your government check if you don't come take this mRNA shot or whatever the thing is. Just be prepared, be wise, be in prayer. And I did want to say one more thing, Maria. You mentioned some of the podcasters, and I want to echo what you said. When I say we need grace for our fellow American conservatives and conservatives around the world, I mean that. But we also need to be very aware that there are paid operatives masquerading as truth tellers. They should be pretty easy to spot. And when I saw Trump tweet out his support for Mark Levin, to say I was suspicious would be to put it mildly. Mark Levin's got a long track record of incredible hostility to real truth tellers, to genuine freedom fighters. And to see that from Trump was very disheartening. So, we, even though I say we need to have grace for our fellow truth tellers and conservatives and Christians, and I mean that, we also need to be aware that there are wolves in sheep's clothing that are here to mislead us.
Yeah.
And when there are errors or dangerous ideas being spread, they need to be called out.
Yes. Be as wise as serpents and as gentle as doves. So
Amen.
don't fall for it. Alex Newman, we are very, very grateful for you. Thank you for your wisdom and for all of your work and your research. I want to encourage people to follow you on X at Alex Newman _JOU, at Alex Newman _JOU. You can also go to the libertysentinel.org. That's libertysentinel.org, and let people know where they can watch you regularly as well, Alex.
Thank you so much, Maria. So libertysentinel.org is my main homepage. I'm also senior editor at the New American Magazine. People can find it at thenewamerican.com. And I work closely with Classical Conversations. It's the biggest Christian homeschool operation in the world with 140,000 students. So if you've got children or grandchildren, check it out. But yeah, free newsletter and all my shows at libertysentinel.org and on our X page. And thank you very much for having me, Maria.
Really appreciate you, Alex. Thank you so much.
God bless you.
God bless. There is a serious problem with health insurance in America. Over 200,000 Americans per year are driven into bankruptcy due to health events despite having health insurance. On average, 20% of people have their claims denied altogether, leaving them and their families helpless, not to mention the additional out-of-pocket expenses, despite dumping thousands of dollars per year into unreliable insurance and deductible payments. Well, did you know there's an alternative? In the midst of all of this, a revolutionary model has emerged that is resulting in just shy of 100% of medical bills being funded, and at literally a fraction of the cost. It's called Crowd Health, with over 28,000 members helped with medical bills, a 99.9% funding success, and over $56 million in medical bills saved. This alternative method of healthcare is sweeping the nation, and people need to know this option exists for them and their loved ones. Crowd Health is not insurance. You can opt out of the broken system and take your power back. Get started today for $99 per member per month for the first 3 months, which includes your member fee and Crowd Health contributions, by using the code PULSE at joincrowdhealth.com/pulse. That's joincrowdhealth.com/pulse. Remember to use code PULSE. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. We hope you appreciate our very earnest attempt to bring you the unfiltered truth, no matter what, no matter how hard it is to hear. We want people to know what's really going on and prepare and not be afraid. So that is our goal, and we will continue to do that. We encourage everyone to follow us on Rumble. If you're not already, make sure to give us a follow. Make sure to like the video as well. It really helps us out. And drop us your thoughts in the comments. We will be back tomorrow night with a very, very important report. So make sure to tune in at 7 p.m. Eastern for that. And if you do appreciate our independent reporting, please make sure to visit our sponsors. We have partnered with businesses that really do care about humanity and our future and are actively working to improve it. And by supporting them, you're also supporting us. So visit their links in the description below. We'll see you tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Eastern.